I'm watching videos here late at night on fucking. Why do I have no fucking sound? Hold on. Hold on. Okay, now I have sound. So I'm watching videos really late night here on fucking my channel, and I think I can watch videos like this.
When I got that depressed. So that day was like, I spent a lot of that day crying. Then the next day got worse. And this is when it gets weird. So
hold on. Here's what's going to happen in this thing. They're talking about carnivore diets fixed to this lady to prevent arthritis. So I have arthritis in my wrist. It hurts really bad. Eating meat does not fix it.
I went over to my parents and I was just like, I don't know what's going on, right? And they're like, well, do you want to take a car back to your apartment? And I said, I don't think I can drive. Like, I just can't think. I don't know what's going on. So my brother drove me home, and I was like on the verge of having a panic attack for no reason, right? It was just like my heart rate was increasing. I was trying to find my keys, and I turned around to look at my brother in the car, and
okay, so listen. This person having a panic attack. If you're at work or anything, no, you just go home to your executive apartment and go to sleep.
His head was a kind of a demon. I know how this sounds, but he had like a demon head.
No, I'm just sitting here because I'm waiting for somebody to be like a demon head. That's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for somebody to be like a demon head. What? Listen.
For about a second and a half. And he looked at me, and then he turned, and then it was my brother again. So I was standing at
So you're hallucinating?
for like about a second and a
Any
half.
other hallucinations?
That year, yes. Before that, no.
That year?
Yeah, after this. I'll get into it.
So you ate soy and started tripping?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me explain what we just heard. She said now she's never had psychopathic fucking tendencies until this year. What? So then Joe Rogan, God bless his little soul, goes, hey, so you wanted to kill more people? She goes, yes. Okay, let's see what she said. Let's see what
2 days later. I know how it sounds. That's how it sounded to me, too.
Have you found comparable stories online?
So obviously I did as much research as I could possibly do. To soy, no. To gluten, to people who are schizophrenic.
Okay, so now what she's explaining is if you have a soy gluten allergy, you probably gonna murder somebody. I think that's what she's saying.
From gluten, yeah. There are people with celiac disease who have schizophrenia induced by gluten. So I found that, but I didn't find anything for other foods.
But does schizophrenia include hallucinations?
Rarely visual, but I did.
So let me ask my people what they think about this. She said people that are mildly schizophrenic may have tendencies of illusions. Not majorly. So if you're majorly schizophrenic, this lady says, nope, you don't get to have fantasy lives. But if you're majorly or mediumly schizophrenic, you could
Find a case study of a woman
hold on.
from gluten. Yeah, there are people with celiac disease who have schizophrenia induced by gluten. So
So if you guys understand what she's saying, if you have a gluten allergy to bread, it's mainly bread, I'm guessing, and you don't take care of it, you might murder somebody.
found that, but I didn't find anything for other foods.
But does schizophrenia include hallucinations?
Rarely visual, but I did find a case study of a
So, in case you didn't understand what she just said, the guy said, Joe Rogan said, is it watch this. Hold on.
Horrible stories online.
So obviously I did as much research as I could possibly do. To soy, no. To gluten, to people who are schizophrenic from gluten, yeah. There are people with celiac disease who have schizophrenia induced by gluten. So I found that, but I didn't find anything for other foods.
But does schizophrenia include hallucinations?
So she's trying to defend schizophrenia. Something I'm saying she has. And he says something about, does that protect you? And she says yes, because she has schizophrenia.
Rarely visual, but I did find a case study of a woman who was seeing demons from her celiac disease.
So, she found a case study of some lady with celiac disease, which is like a kind of a religious disease. I don't know. So she found an example of her saying she has celiac disease. Let's see if she really has celiac disease.
He's gluten.
Now, when you say you looked over and you saw your brother and his head was a demon head, like, describe it.
Like, no,
Vivid?
I found...
Vivid?
No, it was like, you know when it's really dark in a room?
Hey, you guys know when it's like really dark in a room? Watch, let me shut off my lights right here. Let me shut off my lights. Okay. So I shut off my lights. So it's really dark in a room. Do you guys think it's like my brother should die? Probably not. I love my brother. But this lady right here, what the fuck are you talking about? Like when the lights go out? Hold on. Let's see what happens.
And I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's really dark in a room, and then you kind of see things in the dark. Mm-hmm. It was more like that.
You can kind of see things in the dark. So what she just said was, you can kind of see things in the dark. Are you a reptile or a feline? Do you have a different like what is it? You got the iris, the pupil. You got a different pupil. You're seeing shit differently than me.
It was dark at night, and it was like I was so anxious
So you're
that
so distraught, you're a mess, and maybe you just caused yourself to
well,
have
something
this
happened.
idea. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I saw
Okay, so what I witnessed right here is a thing called, "Hey, my name's Joe Rogan. Do you want to smash?" It's like a weird interaction. You think I'm playing? Watch this. Hold on. No, what the fuck? Watch this right
and
here.
I don't know if
Watch
you've
his
experienced this,
face.
but it's really dark in a room, and then you kind of see things in the dark. Mm-hmm. It was more like that. It was
You can kind of see things in the dark. No, take your time. You can kind of see things.
dark
in
at
the
night,
dark.
and it was like I was so anxious
So you
that
So, have you ever had all the lights shut off like I just did on my stream? And then you go, I can't see anything because it's so dark. I don't.
so distraught, you're a mess,
Let's
and
see
maybe
what happens.
you just caused yourself to
well,
have
something
this
happened.
idea. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I saw it. Like I could.
Wait, she just said, well, something happened? Listen, if somebody put a finger near my exit hole, I'm pretty sure I'd remember that. How do you say, yeah, I remember somebody doing something? What is this lady's testimony?
I don't remember what it looks like, but it wasn't a vivid demon or something. It was like, but it was.
I don't remember it. I remember it like a vivid demon. What the fuck are you talking?
There.
Okay, so you're freaking out, basically.
So I'm freaking out. So I'm like, okay, that's not good.
Right.
So I find my keys and I go upstairs, and then I went into my bedroom, like shut the blinds, turned on all the lights, and then like smoked as much weed as I could possibly smoke.
Okay, let's watch her face. Watch.
To try and calm myself down, and then hid under the blankets all night.
If you
I would think that would be
notice-
the worst thing to do after you see a demon.
You'd think that, but then if you smoke. So I've had that comment before, but
See how she won't look at the camera? Watch.
enough, and it calmed me down.
Once.
Okay.
So then I spent the next couple of weeks basically stoned because I didn't know when it was going to end. I didn't know what was going on.
So I've done heroin and I've done fucking weed. I've done everything. You do not escape your horrible past by smoking weed. Like doing heroin is so much better to get rid of your past. So yeah, I don't think
And I
agree
couldn't
with
find
this
anybody
lady.
on the internet who had had the same experience as me.
Let me see this.
And then about 2.5 weeks later, it started going away. And so
When you say it, you mean the depression? Okay.
depression, the arthritis, it wasn't just the depression that
And
came.
had
That's
you
just
adjusted
the
your
worst.
diet?
No, I didn't go back. I mean, I didn't eat soy again, but I went back to the initial diet I was eating.
So essentially, just this one meal, this one great meal of soy threw you off for a couple weeks, radically.
Yeah, like almost 4, like 3 weeks. But after 2 weeks, it started getting better.
Okay.
But the symptoms were like, so this horrible, the itching started. I had bloating, and then the depression came back. And then about a week later, my skin started breaking out. And then maybe 10 days later, my arthritis came back. So I wrote all my symptoms down every day because I was going crazy and I didn't know what was going on. And I wanted to write it down to see what was going on.
Okay.
So then it started lifting and then I started feeling better again. And I was like, okay, thank God that's over. And then waited a while. Things were good again. My symptoms went away. And then over the next year, I tried to reintroduce foods over and over and over again. And I was making, I tried whey protein powder. And that nothing ever got to as bad as that soy experience. But I had a number of other experiences where it was the worst depression I've ever experienced. And it was on the verge of seeing, seeing faces in things.
Okay. So you're having all these health issues. How do you get to the carnivore diet?
So about a year later, I decide, hey, maybe I don't want to keep cycling in and out of a horrible autoimmune and mental problems. Maybe I'll just stick with the original diet. Mm-hmm. And then I got pregnant. And so then my autoimmune symptoms flared again.
During the pregnancy?
Yeah.
Just so you guys know, when you get pregnant, you need a lot of nutrients. You should take prenatal vitamins that give you, a lot of nutrients. It's like a multivitamin, but with more. You know what I mean? You should be doing that. This lady's such a disaster. Let's see what she does. This lady's
right away, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, it was before I found out I was pregnant that my autoimmune symptoms came back. So my legs were itchy again. If
she has autoimmune symptoms, I'm hoping that doesn't mean she has HIV. Because, that's just crazy.
My joints were stiff. My skin was breaking out. Mm-hmm. My anxiety was back. And it was hard to tell, what part of this is pregnancy and what part of this is an autoimmune disorder.
That should never be a question. Which one is the problem?
So throughout my pregnancy, I cut down on all the carbs I was eating. So I cut out fruit. I cut out sweet potatoes. I went down to meat and greens. And I think Dad was on here.
I like fruits and vegetables, but I gotta eat a lot of fucking fruits.
Here one time, and he was on a meat and greens diet. So that was during that part. So we're both on a meat and greens diet, mostly because we didn't realize you didn't need greens to survive. So we were eating meat and greens. And then I had...
Did you just say mostly because we realized you didn't need greens to survive?
We didn't realize only meat was an option.
Wait, so... Let me explain to you guys something. She just said she didn't realize you need to eat meats and greens to survive. So basically how you survive as a human. You have omnivoric teeth. You have teeth that are flat and big in the back and cutting in the front. So you can cut meat and eat vegetables. So you're supposed to eat both things. Which one's better for you? I'm going to say it's the vegetables. But protein helps you build muscle. But yeah. So in general, if you want to know how this works, you got to eat vegetables. Let's go. Let's see what he says.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We hadn't realized that. We didn't know that.
Okay.
So it was meat and salad, and it was a very simple salad with olive oil, apple cider vinegar, salt, pepper.
She's like, it's a simple salad. This is pretty funny.
Cucumbers, lettuces, spinach. Pretty simple salad.
Right.
And then meat and fish. So we did that for about a year. And then I had my daughter, and then I didn't get better. So then I found out, okay, so these symptoms aren't really pregnancy related. It's just me now. And for some reason, I've lost the tolerance to these foods I used to be able to eat. But
you're just eating salad and meat.
Yeah. And I'm still having autoimmune symptoms
the same
now.
Symptoms that you used to have back when you were eating everything?
Not nearly as bad. Not nearly as bad. My fatigue wasn't back. My anxiety was manageable without medication.
But you hadn't achieved the levels of
I didn't-
health that you had
Yeah.
when you were eliminating things from your diet earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like I reached a really good point and then I got pregnant and I couldn't reach that point again.
Okay.
So then this is 2017, so it's like November and I'm getting really frustrated about being itchy. I'm just randomly itchy again. I'm randomly
And
arthritic.
you're just eating meat and vegetables.
Just meat and salad. Yeah. And I thought, okay, maybe I just have an autoimmune disorder and I can't control it with diet anymore. Maybe I'm just stuck like this. And so I Googled, like out of desperation, I think I Googled allergic to everything food-wise, something like that into Google. And I found this story about Charlene Anderson, who's been mentioned a couple of times. And she'd been diagnosed with Lyme disease and has been eating nothing but like red meat for 18 years. And there are pictures of her family online. And I thought, okay, I know I'm not. I think I Googled allergic to everything except meat. So I found her. Then I found that Sean Baker episode you did, and he'd been doing it for 2 years. And I think that night I thought, screw it. I literally have nothing to lose here. I'm only cutting out salad. So that's when I switched over. That was December. And then I switched over and the itching got better pretty quickly, like within the first couple of days. But then my digestion just got totally screwed up. So like bloating and diarrhea every time I ate. And after about a week, I thought, okay, this is a bad idea, obviously.
Bloating, diarrhea every time you ate
Goddamn-
meat.
Hold on.
Just meat.
Like my brother's trying to get me to go vegan, and when I went vegan in the beginning, dude, I couldn't hold anything in.
Just meat.
Jesus
And salt.
Christ.
Yeah. So I thought, this is a bad idea. Obviously, this isn't working. My body doesn't like it.
Lot. I'm trying to test a thing like on Mixer. As long as like for this day, like 60% of my stream is me talking, I can do this. So I'm testing it. You fucking idiot.
So I reintroduced salad again.
I love
It was
you, Lot.
literally lettuce, apple cider vinegar, olive oil, and salt and pepper. That's what I reintroduced. And I woke up the next day and the itch was back.
Why the fuck would you only eat salad and cucumber? I
And my
don't,
joints were stiff. And I thought, okay, if I have to choose between itching and arthritis or diarrhea, I'm going to choose the diarrhea. I was in a rough place.
I guess.
so right now, I'm going to put a test out on stream. Would you rather be itchy or have diarrhea every day? I think I'd rather be itchy.
So I stuck it out, and at 6 weeks of just doing this, the bloating went away, the diarrhea went away, and everything started to improve. So that was mid-January. But I was still pretty skeptical because I thought maybe the reason the carnivore diet worked for people was because they just accidentally cut out everything that wasn't working for them. Processed food, sugar, grains, all that. So I tried to reintroduce olives, like organic olives and all.
First of all, this diet is horrible. Like, I don't know, you just want to eat olive and
Olive oil.
Let's see what
And
happens.
that was February. And then I had this itching came back with the depression. My skin broke out. And it was
So now their itching came back with depression. Lot, do you know what that's called? When somebody gets itching like a physical disturbance because of a mental. Like, you can't. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's see what she says.
minor in comparison to like soy.
So you think, essentially, to give us the cliff notes, you're allergic to everything.
Guild Wars. What the fuck is that? On Steam? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
But
fucking crazy.
it's crazy. But then here's the thing. I started this blog. So the blogs don't eat that. And I started this blog because I thought if for some
So she started a blog on the carnivore diet. I don't know. We're not gonna judge. We're just gonna watch.
For some reason there's someone else out there like me and they're Googling these things. It'd be nice for them to know that they're not alone.
Right.
Oh, so hold on. She's doing this for Google. Because you know, like me, I'm always like, hey, let me Google, hey, what is a carnivore who has arthritis and hepatitis? Or I don't. Let me see what she does. No. Oh, shit, no, I didn't want to.
I don't know if I'll fuck it. I'll get right into it. Unfortunately,
You afraid of heights, Koopa?
Hardly. Fear of heights is illogical. Fear of falling, on the other hand, is prudent and evolutionary.
Well, when you see a guy like Khabib Nurmagomedov just run through people.
Robots. The very
Today's top story is so wildly
let's watch
improbable
this.
that if there wasn't footage, nobody would believe it happened. Luckily, I've included the footage. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and steal all of their sweatpants strings. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
Mr. Ballin. Go check him out. Doctor Who, number 3.
In 1974, Jean-Claude Romand enrolled in medical school in Lyon, France. He was a model student who excelled despite the notoriously brutal course load. In 1980, he married his girlfriend, and shortly after that, they had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. In 1983, he officially became a doctor and landed a great job as a researcher at
Dude, look
In
at this set.
1974,
Let me show you
Jean-Claude
something.
Romand enrolled in medical school in Lyon, France. He was a model student who excelled despite the notoriously brutal course load. In 1980, he married his girlfriend, and
So
shortly
they said notorious, like, heavy course load. Look at this guy on the left. So now you're going to be a fire department, like, head of a fire department. That guy doesn't look like the head of a fire department. And you're saying it had a rigorous training?
After that, they had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. In 1983, he officially became a doctor and landed a great job as a researcher at the World Health Organization in Geneva. His focus was on finding new medicines to treat arteriosclerosis, also known as heart disease. His wife would proudly tell her friends that her husband was a super doctor who worked quietly in a neon-lit lab in Geneva to develop all
Technically, he was. If he was working on heart disease in whatever year this is, they don't have an answer for heart disease now. That guy is
these
insane.
incredible treatments. From the outside looking in, Jean-Claude's life looked perfect. But looks can be deceiving. In the early morning hours of Monday, January 11th, 1993, Jean-Claude's best friend, Luc, received a call informing him there had been a terrible accident. In the night, a boiler had caught fire inside of Jean-Claude's house, killing his wife and his children. Jean-Claude had barely escaped
Give me a wine.
alive, but when he got to the hospital, he'd
Please.
slipped into a
In
coma.
the
The 2 men
fridge.
had been friends for nearly 20 years. They were both doctors, they both got married at almost the exact same time, their kids had grown up together, and now Jean-Claude's family had been completely destroyed. Later that day, when Luc arrived at the hospital to see his friend, he was met with 2 policemen standing outside of his room, barring anyone from going inside. And when they realized Luc was his best friend, the policeman said, "Hey, can we actually pull you aside and talk to you about Jean-Claude?" And so Luc was confused, but he walked over and sat at a table with the 2 officers, and they proceeded to tell him that the fire that had killed Jean-Claude's family had not been an accident, and Jean-Claude was not a doctor. Jean-Claude had enrolled in medical school in Lyon back in the 1970s, but he failed to show up for his first-year exam, and without passing that exam, you can't advance in medical school, and so the school allowed him to retake the year, and so Jean-Claude did that. for 12 consecutive years. All the while, he told his friends and family that he was following normal medical studies, and eventually he told them he had become a doctor. Instead of going to Geneva to discover new medicines for heart disease, Jean-Claude would drive around the border area between France and Switzerland and periodically...
Dude, this guy is 100% bullshit. He is so awesome. I love this guy.
Go to the World Health Organization's Public Information Center and would just walk around the lobby and read pamphlets before going home again. When Jean-Claude went on overseas business trips, he would actually just leave his house, hop on the highway, and stop at a motel, stay there for a couple of days, and then return with gifts. He lived off money from the sale of his student...
That's so funny. He doesn't even go do anything. He just goes...
An apartment in
rents
Lyon
a
that his parents
hotel.
had bought for him. When the money ran out, he asked his friends and family to give him their life savings so he could invest them into these schemes that he knew about because he was a UN employee. And because he's this very successful, reputable doctor, people agreed and gave him their money. But by late 1992, some of his victims were asking for their money, and he didn't have it. And so some of these people began doing some research on Jean-Claude, and they found his name was not listed on the World Health Organization's staff list. By January of 1993, Jean-Claude knew it was only a matter of time before he was exposed. And to this point, he has been living this lie for almost 20 years. His wife...
That's pretty crazy. That guy's fucking
his
insane.
kids, his friends...
That guy's a lying ass motherfucker.
His parents, everybody, he has told that he's the successful doctor, and that's all about to come crashing down. And the way he handles it is he drives to his parents' house and he kills his parents and their dog, and then drives back to his house and kills his family, takes sleeping pills, and then lights the house on fire. But firefighters were able to get to him and pull him out before he could take his own life. And so after he regained his strength, he was taken...
No fucking way. Bro, there's no fucking way you get fucking lit
custody, and he made a confession. He was convicted of murder in 1996 and given a life sentence, but in 2015 he became eligible for parole, and in 2019 he was released.
Get the fuck out of here. Dude, come on. That's the worst sentencing thing I've ever heard. He went to jail for like 19 years.
On September 6, 2006, 51-year-old Susan Kuhnhausen was returning from her job as an emergency room nurse in Portland, Oregon. On the way, she stopped at a hair salon to get her hair dyed. While she waited her turn, she picked up a magazine, and a particular quote stood out to her. It said, "I will not live an unlived life. I will not live in fear." At the time, Susan was fighting with her husband, Mike. They had been married for nearly 18 years, and their marriage had become toxic, and Susan had finally gotten the courage up to tell Mike she wanted a divorce, and Mike did not want a divorce. And so they had these bitter, awful fights, and Susan was just looking for things to latch onto, and this type of quote gave her motivation to follow through with this very difficult decision. About an hour later, with her hair now a slightly different color brown, she hopped back in her car and drove the last couple of miles home to her quiet little neighborhood. She pulled into the driveway of her one-story Cape Cod home with their gray picket fence around it. She went in the back door into their mudroom, and right away she saw a note next to the microwave that her husband had left, because at this time they were still living together. And the note just said, "Sue, I've had trouble sleeping. I've gone to the beach. I'll see you in a couple of days." She put the note down and then unlocked the door that led into the house, which was into the kitchen. And as soon as the door opened up, she heard the beeping sound of their security alarm. And then she walked all the way through the house to the front door. She unlocked it, went outside, and then checked their mail, and then went back inside the house. After she got back inside and had shut and locked the front door behind her, she kicked off her shoes and then began walking across the house towards the kitchen. She got about halfway there when she looked over to her left, and she noticed the first floor bedroom that they used as a guest room was really dark. And every morning before she left for work, she would open all the curtains around the house. And so in the evening, the sun would come into the house and it would be nice and bright. And so she's thinking to herself, did I forget to open the curtains in that room? Because it shouldn't be that dark. And as she's staring at the room, a man she didn't recognize walked out from behind the bedroom door and started walking towards her. He was medium height, medium build. He had a hat pulled down over his eyes. He had yellow rubber gloves on, and he was holding a hammer. And he began walking right towards her. For many people, the sight of a stranger inside of
One, if you're ever in your fucking house and somebody walks into your house, you shouldn't be like, I don't really know what's going on. You're gonna get fucking killed. That's what's gonna fucking happen. Don't fucking let nobody in your house. Murder them immediately. You have all the rights to murder somebody in your
Your
house.
home
Let's
carrying
go.
a hammer would be enough to prompt you to turn around and run out of your house. But not Sue. She had been an emergency room nurse for the past 30 years. And in that time, she had done things like crack open people's ribs to massage their hearts. She had administered IVs and thrashing patients that were suffering from withdrawals. And she and the other nurses she worked with trained regularly.
Okay, now hold on a second. He just said she cracked people's ribs to massage their heart. Now, I don't know if you know what she's talking about. Like, you could technically grab somebody's heart and, like, pump it to get their shit. To claim you've done that, it's a bit strong. I don't think you have. Like, that seems really insane.
In self-defense, because you just never knew what was going to happen in the ER. You needed to be ready to slip chokeholds and defend yourself. And so here Sue was, staring down this intruder.
Did he just say you don't know what's going to happen in the ER, so you might have to slip a chokehold? I think that's what he said. Let's listen.
Would be enough to prompt you to turn around and run out of your house. But not Sue. She had been an emergency room nurse for the past 30 years. And in that time, she had done things like crack open people's ribs to massage their hearts.
There's the cracked open people's ribs. I don't think that's like a technical...
administered IVs and thrashing patients that were suffering from withdrawals. And she and the other nurses she worked with trained regularly in self-defense because you just never knew.
So she and other nurses trained in self-defense. And once again, what happened? Was it an alien? I'm guessing.
What was going to happen in the ER. You needed to be ready to slip chokeholds and defend yourself.
So, when you go to apply to be a doctor in the ER because you're a hero and you're trying to save lives, you need to know that every employee should be able to take down Tony Ferguson or Nate Diaz if they come after you. What?
And so here Sue was, staring down this intruder in her house with 30 years of preparation for this moment. And so Sue
I know what this story is, and it's really funny.
ran at this guy faster than he was coming at her, and it caught him off guard. She figured if she could just get up close to him, the power of the hammer strikes would be less. And so she rams into him, and she's about 5'5" and significantly outweighed him. He's about 5'9", maybe.
So he said she's about 5'5" and significantly outweighed him. That means she was a little heavy. I didn't say it. This guy did. I think she's a hero, but this, I don't know why Mr. Baller.
200 pounds. And so she rams him into the wall. He hits her in the head once with.
I'm not trying to make Mr. Ballin to be out there, but could you just say she saved herself? Why do we gotta know she's heavy?
The hammer,
I don't know.
but it wasn't enough to subdue her or even knock her down. She barely felt it. And so she's holding on to him and she's screaming at him, "Who are you? What do you want?" Because there was a part of her that thought, this is a burglary. I'll just give you what you want. But the guy didn't say anything. And so Susan grabbed him and pushed even harder against the wall. And the man would say 2 words. It was the only 2 words he said the entire time. And it was, "You're strong." And Susan, when she heard that, it was like an adrenaline rush. She knew this guy was not trying to rob her. He was just.
I've seen this before. This guy tried to kill her. Her ex-husband hired the homeless guy do at
trying to
lunch?
kill her. And she thought, no, I'm gonna live. And she managed to wrestle the hammer away from him while pinning him against the wall, and then smashed him in the head 3 times with this hammer before he managed to get it back. But when he
Oh, that was so violent. Like, let's not talk about that.
reached for the hammer, she grabbed his throat and began choking the life out of him. The man immediately went for his throat to get her hand off of him, so he was not trying to attack her. And Susan realized that she had him on the defensive, and she grabbed tighter and tighter around his throat. She moved her other hand up and really started crushing his windpipe.
Whoa, calm down, guy. Nothing like that ever happened.
And then she screamed at him, "I'll call an ambulance if you tell me who sent you." And the man looked at her and just grunted at her. And so she continued to squeeze harder and harder until his face turned purple and his eyes rolled back. And she knew, as an emergency room nurse,
Wait, no, we're not. We're gonna take a break for a sec.
if she continued, she would kill him. And she wasn't really prepared to do that. And so she threw him to the ground. She turned and began to run towards the front door. But this guy jumped up and leapt after her, grabbed her by the ankle, and tripped her to the ground. When she landed, she rolled over onto her back, and right on top of her is this guy wielding the hammer, and he's about to bring it down on her. And so she instinctively just shot up. She sat up as fast as she could, and she bit down as hard as she could on the inner part of his upper leg. She bit so hard she tore through the fabric. And the guy screamed out in pain. He couldn't even hit her with the hammer. He began staggering back, at which point she released the bite, got up onto a knee, and then bit him again on the side of his rib cage as hard as she could, once again tearing through the fabric. And so now this guy,
Just so you know, if you bite somebody, yeah, it really fucking hurts. I've been bit. Never. Yeah.
is howling at the top of his lungs, at which point Sue grabs him and throws him to the ground, but she falls with him, and she lands directly behind his back. And he's still trying to grab her, and he's got the hammer, and he's trying to hit her, and so she reaches out and puts her arm over his throat and puts him in a wicked chokehold, one that he was not getting out of. And so the guy is trying to fight and get his neck out of the chokehold, but Susan decided that this guy, he's not going to talk, he's not going to tell me what he wants, he's here to kill me, so
One, if you're gonna get a chokehold on your opponent, you normally have to be stronger. So this story is a little sus.
I'm going to kill him first. And
No, there's no. You're not.
she proceeded to choke him to
Let's
death.
see what
Once he
happens.
stopped moving, she calmly stood up, looked down, knew he was dead. She grabbed his hammer and then calmly walked out the front door, walked to her neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and then her neighbor comes up and sees Sue just standing there with her clothes tattered and she's all bruised and bloodied, but she looks like she's totally okay. And the neighbor asks Sue, what are you doing? What's going on? Why do you have that hammer? And Sue would tell her that, well, I had an intruder and he tried to kill me, so I killed him. And I need to use your phone to call the police. And so her neighbor's like, okay, come on in and use my phone. And so Sue walks in with her hammer in hand and calmly calls the police and tells them what happened. Police and paramedics show up and they go inside of Sue's house and they confirm that her attacker was in fact dead. And her attacker turned out to be 59-year-old Ed Haffey, who was a Vietnam veteran with a long rap sheet. They discovered Ed's backpack inside of Susan's house, and in it was a notebook that contained instructions for what to do after he killed Susan. And one of those instructions was to call Mike. It turns out this Mike was Susan's husband. He had paid Ed $50,000 to kill his wife. And Mike, earlier in the day, had gone to the house and allowed...
Okay, watch this. This is crazy. This guy paid this dude, this homeless guy, to kill his wife, and his wife, ex-wife, or whatever it is, killed the fucking guy. It's insane.
Ed in and told him where to go and where to wait, and then on his way out he had written that note saying, I'll see you in a couple of days. When police brought Mike in, he initially denied all charges and said he had nothing to do with this, but he would eventually
This is
confess
nuts.
and then would be
Dude,
sentenced to
there's
7
no way, like, his wife killed the guy with her self-defense classes.
years in prison for soliciting to murder his wife.
It is
Although Mike never gave his
insane.
exact motivations for why he actually did this, he would have been ruined financially during this divorce, But if Susan were to die, he would inherit the house. Immediately after his sentencing, Susan sued Mike for $1 million, claiming she wanted to make sure he didn't have any more money so that he couldn't go hire another hitman to finish the job. Susan didn't have to worry for very long though, because Mike would die shortly thereafter in prison. As for Susan, she never faced any criminal charges and in fact was hailed as a hero in the wake of the attack.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Blake. Hey, I got a surprise for you. It's going to shock you a little bit.
Richard Russell, better known as Bebo by his friends and family, was born in 1989 in Key West, Florida, but at the age of 7, he moved to Wasilla, Alaska. He was a standout athlete at Wasilla High School, competing in football and in track and field. After graduating in 2008, he moved to Coos Bay, Oregon, where he briefly attended a community college. While he was there, he met a woman named Hannah Strassner, and in 2011, they got married. And shortly after that, they opened a bakery that they would run together for 3 years. Hannah, who had gone to culinary school, was very detail-oriented and ran the show at the bakery. Bebo, on the other hand, was not professionally trained and was much more laid back and interested in experimenting with new and wild recipes. In 2015, with heavy hearts, they decided to sell the bakery so they could move to Seattle and be closer to Hannah's family. Once they arrived there, Bebo got a job at the SeaTac airport as a ground service agent for Horizons Airline. It was not a job he necessarily wanted, but they needed the cash. After working at Horizons Air for 4 years as a ramper, someone that moves the luggage in and out of the aircraft, Bebo was given some additional responsibility. They asked him to be on a 2-person tow team. A tow team is in charge of moving airplanes around in between their flights. And so the way this works is one person goes down and drives the actual tow vehicle and hooks that up to the airplane and begins moving it around, and the other person would go up into the cockpit, turn the plane on, and then work a couple of very basic systems to help get the plane to go where it needs to go. The members of a tow team are one of the very few number of people that are allowed to go into the cockpit of an aircraft by themselves. And so Bebo really relished this opportunity, and when he was up there, he found himself fascinated with all the controls, and any chance he got, he would ask a pilot, if they were inside of the aircraft, to teach him what some of these controls were. But one time, Bebo was flipping some of the switches in the cockpit that he was not supposed to touch, that other pilots had told him about, and the pilot of this particular plane caught him doing it, took exception to it, and reported him. But surprisingly, there were no repercussions. It was just really embarrassing for Bebo. Like many of the other ground service agents working at Horizon Airlines, Bebo was generally unhappy with his job. He felt like it was boring, that there wasn't much upward mobility, and that he was criminally underpaid. But there was one redeeming quality of his job, and that was, in virtue of working for an airline, he got all sorts of free airfare. And so not only did he get to fly for free all over the world, he got to fly basically anytime he wanted up to Alaska to visit his hometown and see his family, something that was very important to him. The people that knew Bebo said he had a great sense of humor, he was extremely friendly, and you could always catch him with his head buried in a book. And his coworkers would say he had aspirations to be an officer in the military. And when all those people that knew Bebo the best were asked, why do you think he did what he did on August 10th, 2018, none of them have an answer. On that fateful day at 1:35 p.m. local time, a passenger airplane owned by Horizon
I'm going to tell you right now, I have an answer for you.
Airlines flew into SeaTac Airport, where Bebo worked. And so this plane was not scheduled to fly for the rest of the day, so it was taxied to the far north section of the airport to a parking spot called Cargo 1. At 7:15 p.m. that evening, Bebo arrived at Cargo 1, and he climbed inside the empty aircraft and made his way into the cockpit. He followed the startup procedure until the plane was on and the propellers were started.
I'm already guessing this guy did not register this flight because it's like a billionaire or whatever. I don't think he registered this flight.
Starting to turn. He hopped out of the plane, got in his tow vehicle, and used it to turn the plane around so its nose was pointed towards the airfield. He moved the tow vehicle out of the way and then climbed back inside the aircraft, shut it behind him, and got in the cockpit and began taxiing out towards the runway. For the next few minutes, air traffic control bombarded Bebo over the radio, asking him, "What are you doing? This is unauthorized movement. You should not be heading towards the runway right now." But Bebo never responded. Instead, he just continued on until he reached the beginning of the runway, at which point, despite having no flight experience, minus some video games and fiddling with some switches in the cockpit while he was in the tow team, he managed to go full throttle and get this plane careening down the runway and successfully took off. But that was nothing compared to what he did next. Over the course of his 1 hour-long flight, he expertly performed backflips and barrel rolls and these huge loops in the sky, dangerous maneuvers that even expert pilots might risk stalling the plane and crashing. But he didn't. It was like he'd been doing this his whole life. Onlookers on the ground were shocked to see this passenger airline performing these ridiculous...
He GTA'd that motherfucker. He did 360s and barrel rolls and shit.
Ridiculous stunts so low to the ground that all over Seattle you had people filming this plane and posting it to social media. So in real time, it was like the world was made aware of Bebo up in the sky. And so people went outside and just watched as he flew around. But the real story is not the aerial stunts that Bebo was pulling in the sky. It was the strange, calm conversation that Bebo had with the air traffic controller the whole time he was up in the sky. The extremely professional, very calm air traffic controller tries to convince Bebo that he...
Motherfuckers doing 360s and barrel rolls with a Dreamliner, like a 767. Mao! Come here. Come here, Mao. Come here. Oh, I love him, Mao. Mao. Oh, no, Mao. Mao. I just want to love you, Mao. Mao, I just want to love you. Mao. What are you doing, Mao? I'm gonna scratch your back. Oh, that was crazy. Okay. Mao, you're crazy, not me.
He really needs to come down and land this aircraft. And he begins telling him where he can go, different airfields, and if he needs to, he can land out in the Puget Sound. But Bebo kind of laughs it off and says, you know, I wasn't really ever trying to land this plane. I just wanted to do a couple maneuvers before I put it down. And so as Bebo soared through the sky, this controller tries in vain to convince Bebo to stop what he's doing. And Bebo's just completely ignoring him and cracking jokes with him and telling him how he just loves the scenery up there and how beautiful it is. And then at one point, Bebo becomes remorseful and he says to the controller that he really hopes he hasn't ruined his day and he feels really bad for the people that he's inevitably going to hurt. And then in Bebo's most poignant moment, he tells the controller that he's just a broken guy and he's got a couple of screws loose and he didn't know it until now. Towards the end of the flight, Bebo tells the controller that he's going to try for one more barrel roll, and if it goes well, he's going to go nose down and call it a night. The controller tries to convince him that it's still possible to try to land, but at this point, Bebo's not listening. At 8:45 p.m., the nose of the plane was seen pointed straight down at the earth. 1 minute later, at 8:46 p.m., Bebo intentionally crashed into a small island off the coast of Seattle. He was the only fatality in the crash. Here is a condensed version of some of the commentary between Bebo and the air traffic controller, along with some of the real footage of him flying the plane.
I just kind of want to do a couple maneuvers, see what it can do before I put her down, you know?
Approach welcome, final runway 16 right.
Welcome. Man, I'm a ground service agent. I don't know what that is.
There is the runway just off your right side in about a mile. Do you see that?
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to land it. I wasn't really planning on landing it. I got a lot of people that care about me, and it's going to disappoint them.
He doesn't know how to land it?
I would like to apologize to each and every one of them. Just a broken guy. Got a few screws loose, I guess. Never really knew it until now. I think I'm gonna try to do a barrel roll, and if that goes good, I'll just go nose down and call it a night.
How Bebo was able to take off and fly around and pull these stunts.
One, there's no... Okay. I'm seriously okay. Nothing went really weird with that pose.
Without any formal training remains a mystery. Some people believe he was planning this for a long time, which is why whenever he was in the cockpit, when he was in the
he might have been planning that, but god damn.
Team, he would ask pilots to explain the different switches and toggles and how to use them, and he would feign that he was just curious, when in reality he was actually trying to learn how to fly the plane. As for the incredible stunts he was doing, it's believed he did learn those in a video game. But even if this is true, that he learned how to fly a plane by asking a couple questions and playing video games.
So if you guys don't understand what he's saying, like Microsoft, Flight, Quentin. Hold on, let me see if I can call him. I don't know what it's called. I think it's called Microsoft Flight. It's, that shit's insane.
What is this brief mortal life if not the pursuit of legacy?
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch.
Today's final story deals with a destructive, horrible, vile act that virtually anyone can do. However, there are no laws against it. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button to be the back half of your two-person horse costume for Halloween, and then when they accept, spend the night before drinking Miller Lite and eating falafel. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 2007, 60-year-old Michael Dick was living in Bow, East London with his wife and two daughters. While his life was not exactly exciting, it was good. He lived in a quiet and safe neighborhood, and Michael, who used to be a carpenter, was now semi-retired and got to spend the bulk of his time with his friends and family. But that year, something really started to bother him. 10 years prior, Michael had split up with his first wife. Today's final story deals with a destructive, horrible... And then from there, the trio just kind of began driving around Sudbury, half looking for Lisa out on the streets, although none of them thought they would actually find her, and then also kind of discussing what they were going to do next, because now they had nothing. And so as they're driving around the streets of Sudbury, they come to the realization that their best bet at finding Lisa is putting some sort of story in the local newspaper that hopefully she would see, and then she would contact Michael. And so they drove to the headquarters of the local paper, the Suffolk Free Press, and they went inside and they managed to speak to a reporter. And after telling the reporter Michael's story about how he's lost touch with Lisa, the reporter thought, you know what, this is actually a pretty interesting story and I'd be happy to do a small feature on you guys. And so the reporter, along with a photographer, brought Michael and his two daughters outside. They took a picture of them, and then they told Michael, you know, in the next edition of the paper that will run in a couple of days, we'll run this picture along with a little write-up about how you're looking for Lisa, and we'll put your contact information in there, and hopefully she sees it and she reaches out to you and you can be reunited and live happily ever after. And so Michael thanked the reporter and the photographer, and then he and his other two daughters hopped in the car and headed back to Bow, East London. In 2007, at the same time that Michael was beginning his search for Lisa, Lisa was actually beginning to think, you know what, I want to go find my dad. Lisa was now 31 years old. She had 3 kids of her own. She was married. She had moved out of Sudbury to a neighboring town. And she was thinking, you know, I really want to have a relationship with my dad again so that my kids can have a relationship with him. And so she began speaking with her mother and with friends about how she should go about finding her dad, because like Michael, she didn't have his contact information. She didn't have a phone number. She didn't know anyone who would. And then when she went on social media to look for him, he wasn't on there. And so she was kind of at a loss. Then one day in August, she was at her office and she was in the break room and she saw a copy of the Suffolk Free Press sitting out on the coffee table. So she picked it up and she began flipping through the pages. And then suddenly she stopped when she saw a picture of herself. She saw her and her mother walking along the streets of Sudbury. She had been in Sudbury just a couple of days ago to talk to her mom about finding her dad and kind of strategies for how to go about doing that. And then Lisa glanced at the caption for this photo and she nearly fell off of her chair. The man and the two girls who were the main focus of this photo that Lisa was in were her father and her two stepsisters. She just didn't recognize them. She just saw herself in the back of this photo. So purely by chance, after being apart for over a decade, on the only day that Lisa happened to be in Sudbury talking to her mom about finding her father, she was literally 100 feet behind her father and her stepsisters as they were looking for her and putting out this ad in the paper to hopefully find her. And this one photo that the photographer took captured all of them in the same frame. Lisa would, of course, read the article and get her father's contact information. She would reach out, and initially Michael actually thought it was a scam and didn't believe this was actually Lisa calling to say, "I found myself in the picture of you in Sudbury." But eventually he was convinced and he drove right out to Sudbury and he got a chance to meet his grandkids for the first time. And today he and Lisa are still in touch. Before we get into our next story, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. One of the hardest things about struggling with your mental health is that oftentimes you don't actually know you're struggling with your mental health. Before I became Mr. Ballin on the internet, I struggled mightily with depression. However, had you asked me at the time how I felt, I would have just thought I had a bad temper, not realizing that my bad temper was a symptom of deeper issues. Luckily, I was able to go outside of my comfort zone and seek out a therapist, and with their help, I was able to change my outlook on life and become a happy person again. Because therapy has had such a positive impact on my life, I recently partnered with BetterHelp, which is a very highly reviewed online therapy platform that I currently use, and I think it's totally awesome. And so far, the people from our Strange, Dark, and Mysterious community who have also given BetterHelp a shot, they've given us permission to share some of their feedback, and as you can see, it's very positive. BetterHelp is super easy to sign up for and use. You just fill out a questionnaire that assesses your specific needs, and then within 48 hours, you are matched up with your therapist. Then you schedule secure video and phone sessions, plus you can exchange unlimited messages, and anything you share is totally confidential. Also, you can change your therapist at any time for no additional cost. So if you are even considering trying out therapy, I highly recommend BetterHelp as your starting point. If you're interested, make sure you go to betterhelp.com/Mr. Ballin. That is betterhelp.com/Mr. Ballin to get 10% off your first month. Okay, let's get back to the stories. If I told you to picture the Amazon rainforest in your head, you would likely picture a dense tropical wilderness full of amazing and exotic animals. And you'd be right, that is a good representation of the Amazon rainforest. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Amazon rainforest is also home to a massive city. It's called Manaus, and it sits right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, right along the Amazon River. And it happens to be one of the most violent places in the entire world. All it takes in Manaus is simply walking down the wrong street or crossing the wrong person, and you can get shot or stabbed in broad daylight, and there's virtually nothing anyone can do to stop it. In 1989, a 31-year-old former police officer named Wallace Souza decided to make a TV show about what it was actually like to live in his hometown of Manaus. And unlike other crime shows in Brazil that often censored out the most graphic content they covered, Wallace decided he wasn't going to do that. He wanted to expose the harsh reality of life in Manaus, and he felt like the only way to do that was to show everything. And so that year, he launched this show, which he called Canal Livre, which translates roughly to free channel. And true to form, there was no filter on what went on the air. And so this show was shocking. Viewers were given a front row seat to freshly murdered victims that are lying out in the road and slumped over chairs in restaurants and behind steering wheels, and the cameraman would zoom in on their fatal injuries, and they would zoom in on the faces of these people that have just died. Every gratuitous detail, every blood spatter, every grieving family member of the victim who's crying out in pain, all of it was shown on this TV show. And then in between these very dark and violent segments about gang killings and drug deals gone wrong, Canal Livre also had a much lighter side. They would bring on local artists to talk about what they're working on, to maybe try to sell some of their goods. The show would also focus on down on their luck families that needed help raising some money, and so the show was designed to get people to donate. And then also, for really no reason at all, there was a segment on the show where this puppet character would get into a fight with a man selling bread. It was a totally bizarre and shocking spectacle, and the people of Manaus loved it. And then eventually the people of Brazil loved it. I mean, this was an extremely popular show. Because Wallace was often on camera on Canal Livre, he became very famous and very recognizable. And so when he would walk around Manaus, people would see him and literally just start clapping and cheering for him. And as he and his show became more and more popular across South America, Wallace decided he didn't just want to report on crime, he wanted to fight crime. So, on air, Wallace began berating the government for not being able to protect its citizens, and he berated the police for not being able to catch the criminals. And then off the air, Wallace campaigned for and was elected to political office in Manaus, where he continued to push hard to reduce crime in the city. And so it wasn't long before Wallace went from just being a relatively well-known TV host to being one of the most beloved and influential and trustworthy people in all of Brazil. However, over the years, there was one strange thing about his show, Canal Livre, that people just couldn't wrap their heads around. This oddity was most obvious in a now famous episode of Canal Livre that aired sometime in the mid-2000s. This episode opens with a Canal Livre reporter making
From the world of X comes a terrifying new origin story. Pearl.
You're not gonna say anything, are you?
On September 16th, Mia Goth stars as Pearl. A girl with big dreams who will stop at nothing to make them come true.
I want to be loved by as many people as possible.
Pearl.
I think I'm gonna do Grand Canyon University's online program and get my master's degree. But I have a career now. I don't know if I can do school and work at the same time. And I love my job. I don't want to risk that. But I know I can advance even further if I do it. My abuelita's dream was to come to this country so her family could get an education and have a better life. She told my father when he was young, "You must get a degree, provide more for your children." She told me, "Mijo, stop picking your mocos and finish your homework." Abuelita, my father, my whole family, and the education I received at Grand Canyon University made me the man I am today. She and my abuelo were young when they got married.
¡Ay, qué bonita niña! ¡Ay, qué bonita niña! No, así. Deja, mejor yo lo hago.
Neither of them had finished high school before they came to this country. She took care of the children, and my abuelo worked a physically demanding job to support the family.
Hola, ¿cómo están?
Ay, qué bueno.
Hi, tía. Both of my parents were high school graduates and had decent jobs that supported me and my siblings.
Would have been faster if Dad didn't take so long picking out which cookies. Hey, I got it. Every Dr. Pop. All right.
And even though I know my father was appreciative of his parents' hard work, he wanted more for us. That's why he ended up enrolling in GCU's online program to finish his bachelor's degree. My mom took on extra shifts at work. And when both of my parents were busy, I spent a lot of time with my tia. I know that I wouldn't be where I am right now if it weren't for my family. I don't know, I really want to do this, but I also don't want to leave one thing I love for another thing. I don't know.
La vida es muy difícil, pero también es muy hermosa. Tú eres fuerte. Trata de llevar a tu familia en el corazón y lograrás lo que tú quieres. Estoy muy orgullosa de ti.
It always motivated me to be better.
Gracias, abuelita.
I really wanted to make them proud. And I wanted them to know that everything they did was worth it.
En nombre del Padre, del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo. Amén. Démonos las manos. Señor, te damos gracias.
Use some of the salsa too. I have an announcement to make. So I'm going to get my master's degree in computer science online at GCU.
I know that I wouldn't be where I am right now if it weren't for my family. Because of them, I was able to attend college full-time and earn my bachelor's degree. And because of them, I'm able to go back and get my master's degree. My gratitude is never ending. And though I can never repay them for everything they've done for me, that won't stop me from trying. Everything I do for them.
Their way through a jungle, and there's a cameraman filming them from behind, and this reporter, they're very carefully walking through, kind of pushing branches out of the way and high-stepping over all the underbrush. And then at some point up ahead, you see there is a clearing, and there is a third person standing in this clearing, and they're clearly looking straight down at something on the ground that we can't see. But this third person is very occupied with whatever is on the ground. And so eventually this reporter makes their way through the jungle into this clearing, and then as soon as the cameraman gets into the clearing as well, he looks down at what is on the ground. And what you see is what appears to be a log that has previously been lit on fire because it's still smoking and it's black and it's charred. But as the cameraman zooms in, you see there are hands on this log. So you realize it's not a log, it's a human being who's obviously deceased. And based on how badly charred they are and how much they're still smoking, you realize very quickly that this person must have been on fire very recently as probably just a couple of minutes ago. Like right before the camera got here, this person was on fire. And so as you're kind of seeing this shocking image, the reporter suddenly talks about this person like he knows all the details of them already. He says, this person, it's a man, and they were not shot to death. They were doused with gasoline and burned alive. But at this point, the police had not come out. They had not seen this dead person yet. And so it made no sense that the reporter would have all this information on hand, because no one knows this stuff yet, and based on just looking at this person's body, it was too badly burned to be able to tell whether it was a man or whether they had been shot or not, or whether gasoline was used. But when Wallace was questioned about where he and his reporters got their information from, he just said, look, we're a very popular show and people call us often before they call the police, and they give us information about what's happening in the city, and we have a huge team. We watch the police headquarters, we listen to the police's radio, we watch the morgue, we have loads of informants all over the city, and so we just get our information really, really quickly. And this answer was enough until 2008. That year, in October, the police arrested a former Manaus police officer who just went by the name Moa, and they accused him of 9 murders. And so they throw him in jail. But Moa, despite the seriousness of the charges against him, seems totally unfazed. It was obvious he had some sort of powerful connection outside of prison, some person or some entity that he fully expected was going to, at any moment, swoop in and magically get him out of prison. But that didn't happen. Moa just continued to sit in jail, and at some point that began to sink in that he was kind of on his own, and so he began to talk. And the story he would tell would shock Brazil. Moa would admit to having killed some people, but he would tell police, look, I'm just the assassin. The person who hired me for these killings is Wallace Sousa. It would turn out Wallace Sousa started his show, Canal Livre, with the best of intentions. But when his show became massively popular, and it in turn made him, Wallace, also massively popular and powerful, he became corrupt. And at some point, after his meteoric rise, he formed this very powerful drug cartel, and then in an effort to bolster his illegal dealings and to boost his show's ratings, he decided to start contracting hitmen like Moa to start taking out rival gang members in Manaus. And he would tell the hitman how he wanted them killed and where he wanted them killed and at what time, and then after the hitman agreed to do this, he, Wallace, would go tell his camera crews exactly where to go and at what time so that they would be arriving at the murder scene literally right as it was happening or right afterwards, allowing them the opportunity to get all the gory footage before anybody else. It would take the police a year to finally compile enough evidence to charge Wallace with murder, but they would do it in October of 2009, and eventually Wallace would turn himself in. However, he denied everything. And then before he went to trial, he would die of a heart attack in prison. And so we never actually got to learn the full extent of what exactly Wallace Sousa had done, how many people he had had assassinated, and how many of them were shown on his TV show. But we do know that at least 3 of his assassination victims were shown on his TV show, one of them being the person that was found out in the jungle. They really were a man. They really had not been shot. They had been burned alive with gasoline at Wallace's discretion. But in the end, the person who paid the highest price for the Canal Livre killings was Moa, the hitman who blew the whistle on what was going on with the show. On New Year's Day in 2017, a crime syndicate overran the prison where Moa was being held. Now, they had lots of targets of people they were going there to kill, and one of them was Moa. They were furious with him that he spoke to police and gave up information about the drug trade in Brazil. And so eventually, this angry mob of gangsters made their way over to Moa's cell, and when they found him, he was pressed up against the back of his cell wall, basically as far away from the bars as he possibly could be, and he began pleading for his life, and this horde was not having it. They were only there to kill him. And so they all have machetes and knives, and they're looking at him through the bars, and they say, you know, we're going to come in there, we're going to cut you to pieces. And so then they start banging on the door, they're trying to hack the lock open, and Moa, he can't do anything. All he can do is kind of just keep himself all the way to the back of the cell and hope they don't get in. And eventually, they can't open the door, and they know it. And so they do the next best thing. They reach through the bars with a lighter and they light Moa's mattress on fire. And so Moa was trapped. He had nowhere to go, and so eventually the fire reached him and he burned alive.
Do you want to be perfect with me?
I don't trust this place.
Rated R.
In 2010, 18-year-old Renee Marsden was living in Sydney, Australia with her parents and her 3 siblings. Renee was a very outgoing person who had a big circle of friends, and she was also very close with her family, especially her mom, Teresa. Teresa had given birth to Renee when she was only 19 years old, and so now that Renee was a young woman, because of their closeness in ages, the two had become very close friends instead of mother and daughter. And so because of that dynamic, Renee found herself always going to her mother to tell her anything going on in her life. She was her confidant. And that year, something major had disrupted Renee's life, and so naturally she went to her mom and she told her about it. It would turn out Renee's boyfriend of nearly 2 years, who she was madly in love with, well, she discovered he was cheating on her and didn't actually even care about her. He had sent these text messages that basically said as much. And so she confronted her boyfriend with these text messages, and he denied ever sending them. He said, look, I've never cheated on you. I don't know where those came from. I promise I've been faithful to you this entire time. But Renee just wasn't buying it, and so she had felt forced to break up with him. And so Renee naturally had turned to her mother for comfort and guidance, but Teresa, all she could really offer her daughter was, to remind her that time heals all wounds, and that certainly someday you will meet the right person for you. And amazingly, only a couple of weeks after this very painful breakup, Renee came home from work one day, and she walked into the house, and she was all smiles. And considering how unbelievably depressed she had been over the last couple couple of weeks, I mean, this really stood out. And so when her mom saw her smiling and radiating happiness, she rushed over to her and said, you know, what's gotten into you? Why are you in such a good mood? And Renee would tell her that, actually, I've met another guy. And so Teresa said, who? Who did you meet? Who is this person? And she would tell her mom that his name is Braden Spiteri. He was 23 years old, and he was a graduate of the King's School, which is a really prestigious boys' school in Sydney. And his father was this really successful business person who owned this big construction company that he was set to inherit later on. And so she was just raving about how amazing this guy was. And Teresa was really happy. If nothing else, this was a very good distraction for her. And so she asked her daughter at some point, you know, how'd you meet this guy? And Renee would tell her that Camilla had introduced them. Camilla Zaidan was Renee's best friend. They had met in high school. And Renee would explain to her mother that Braden was actually Camilla's ex-boyfriend, but they hadn't dated in a really long time, and there was no feelings between them. They were just friends at this point. And apparently, you know, after Renee had this really painful breakup, Camilla had just felt bad for her, and so she had gone out and found the best possible match for Renee, which in her mind was this guy Braden. Teresa knew Camilla really well because she was always over the house, and she knew Teresa's intentions must have been good, but she's thinking to herself, this is bad news. You don't want to have best friends, one dating the ex-boyfriend of the other. It's just bad news waiting to happen. And so Teresa couldn't even help herself, and she says to her daughter, do you really think it's a good idea to be dating Camilla's ex-boyfriend? But Renee would tell her mom, look, Camilla was totally upfront with me. She just wants me to be happy. She thinks Braden is a good match for me. They don't have feelings anymore, not at all. She's totally in support. And so Teresa still very much had her doubts that this was a good idea. But she put those doubts aside, and instead she said, okay, well, can you show me a picture of Braden? Can I see what he looks like? And so Renee pulls out her phone and she finds a picture of Braden and she shows it to her mom. And right away, her mom is looking at this picture and seeing that Braden is a very handsome guy, big, bright smile. But she sees in this picture, Camilla is very clearly laying on his shoulder like she is his girlfriend. And so again, Teresa's thinking to herself, this is not good. Someone is going to get hurt. But over the next couple of weeks and months, Renee and Braden texted each other all the time. I mean, Renee had her phone out basically 24/7 talking to Braden. The pair had made plans to meet up and see each other in person for the first time on several different occasions, but every single time they were set to go meet, one of them would have a conflict that would make it impossible to have this face-to-face meeting. And so before long, when they just could not get a meeting established, they kind of stopped trying to have face-to-face meetings. It was almost like they had built this really strong, flourishing relationship all via their phones, and it just was getting more and more awkward to actually go out and see each other in real life. It was just more comfortable doing it all on their phones. And so this digital-only relationship between Renee and Braden continued for almost a year until January of 2012, when something horrible happened. Braden was in a horrible motorcycle accident. He survived the accident, but his passenger, his best friend, this guy named Richie, who was riding right on the back of his motorcycle, he didn't survive. He was killed in the accident. And it was determined that Braden was driving recklessly. And so he was charged with manslaughter and convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Even though Renee's mother, Teresa, was totally upset about this accident. I mean, she did understand someone had lost their life and now Braden was going to jail for 2 years. She understood the seriousness of this accident. But at the same time, there was a part of her, her motherly, protective side of her, that was kind of relieved for her daughter. She figured with Braden being out of contact for 2 years in prison, that their relationship would end and Renee could go pursue somebody else who was not an ex-boyfriend of a close friend and was someone that she could actually see in person and not just have to text with all the time. But surprisingly, after Braden was transferred to Goulburn Prison, which is where he'd be serving his 2-year sentence, it's located about 2 hours to the south of Sydney, his family smuggled a phone somehow into this jail, and he was able to continue texting with Renee. And so after he was incarcerated, they just picked up their relationship like nothing had changed. Now, Renee's family did not like this development, and they told her as much. They thought this was a bad idea, that this was the wrong path for her, but Renee didn't care. She was totally in love. And in fact, over the first couple of weeks that he was in Goulburn Prison, their relationship relationship only intensified. They actually agreed to get married as soon as he was released at the end of 2013. And in fact, Renee had already begun making wedding preparations. She had gone on eBay and found this beautiful tiara she would wear on her wedding day, and she had contracted a wedding photographer, and she had even contacted the Greek consulate to ask if it would be okay if Braden were allowed to enter their country, because they were planning to have their honeymoon in Greece, and Braden was going to be a convicted felon, and so she needed permission for him. But in August of 2013, just 2 months before Braden's expected release date, something changed. Renee's